In today's episode, I wanted to talk about narcissism and what it is to truly love somebody else. In Britain today, we have the reality TV show Love Island, and you'll hear phrases in public such as choose love and not hate, or love is love. And it occurred to me that how do we know what it is to love somebody else unless you have a sophisticated understanding of the concept of love? It's not really immediately obvious what it is to really love somebody else. And so this is important for us all, absolutely, because we often base our happiness in our lives on the relationships that we have with others and even love in friendships. So you could be going about your entire life with a poor understanding of what it is to love somebody else, and this might be impacting upon you and your relationship or you and your friendships with others. And if you just kind of change the way you think about what it is to love somebody else and acted upon it, it might help you in your life to further betterment and to a more fulfilling experience of the world and a better life. So I thought today I would talk about what it is to actually love somebody else. What is the root of this idea in our culture? And I would talk about how I think we're moving away from a traditional idea of what it is to love somebody, and we're moving towards this new era of like narcissism and individualism. And I think that's detrimental and poisonous to people's lives in our culture. But when it comes to a question like what is love, what is it to love somebody else, it's incredibly difficult to answer that question on your own, because unless you're extremely intelligent and you can just calculate and come up with a sophisticated answer, or if you're extremely wise and you've got a lot of experience and you can pull from that experience a good answer about what love is, it's not really immediately obvious what it is. And you're just kind of left alone to try and conjure up an idea of what love is. And that's not really a strong or a wise way to do it. You know, who are we to just produce a sophisticated answer to what love is? And that's myself included. I'm kind of reliant on others who've already lived and who've already thought deeply about these questions to give me a good answer that I can think about myself and maybe adjust my life to. And so if we come to that conclusion that we're kind of reliant on other people to get to the answer of what love is, then we need to decide who is an authority on this subject and who we can trust to have given us their wisdom that it might be used by us in a good manner. And I think where we have to start is to consult the people who came before us, the people who've lived their lives and then passed down their observations on the human condition in the form of stories, in the form of poems, in the form of books, art, even myth. We can generally trust that these books or poems or myths have some sort of cultural value. They transmitted some kind of truth to a person that was useful if they've been passed down repeatedly through time by people, because it obviously means that the people who passed them down to their children and to their children's children thought that there was something extremely valuable in those works that would be of use to future generations. And yes, you could turn around as a skeptic and say to me that the times change and we don't live in the same world as our ancestors did, and technology is always improving and changing our reality. And I would say, yes, that's true to an extent. Your ancestors won't live in the exact same experience that you did or at the exact same times, but that doesn't mean that our nature fundamentally changes. Human nature is the same throughout our species' history. And so that will mean that the way that you interact with the world is similar to the way that your ancestors interacted, and you will face similar experiences. Things like friendship, for example. Friendship's obviously something that we've all experienced to some degree, and it's something that your ancestors will also have experienced, because it's a kind of cornerstone of human nature to be socially interactive with other people. And so that's how friendships develop. So that's happened throughout time as our species has lived on this earth. So there are things that are true to the human species that happen to all of us throughout time. And these things mirror themselves again and again in the human experience. Even things like how we interact with others, how we gain approval and disapproval for our actions, these tend to be things that are universally true throughout time. And what, of course, this means is that our ancestors will have experienced similar scenarios to the ones we do, and it will have generated similar emotions and reactions in them. And so that's the first place to consult, because we might find something within their writings and poetry or myths that provide us with an insight into truths about the human condition and about love and narcissism. And the earliest example that I can think of a culture that wrote and passed down its myths about the human condition is the ancient Greeks, and particularly in their story of Narcissus. The tale of Narcissus has got different variations, but the broad elements of the story are the same. And the version of the tale that I will summarize here, he was a hunter blessed with unnatural good looks. And I think he was in the forest one day, and a nymph called Echo fell in love with him and approached him, and he rejected her. And the Greek gods, or one of the Greek gods, got angry about this, and so punished Narcissus by tricking him into becoming obsessed with himself. So he finds a pool where he sees his reflection in the water for the first time and becomes absolutely besotted with himself and can't turn away from it. So in the story, he's cursed to live in this existence where he's just in love with himself in a pool, and the story kind of culminates with him never being able to break out of it. And so he eventually comes to the devastating realization that the love that he feels for himself can never be reciprocated by another human being. And so he can never fully appreciate what it is to be loved by somebody else or to love them. And he realizes that this is a great deficit in his life and has ruined his life effectively. And so if we're cynical, we could just say, oh, this is just a silly story. What use does it have to us now? It's the year 2023. This doesn't pass any scientific rigor. It didn't actually happen. It has no historical value because it didn't actually happen in the historical record. It's just a silly myth, and we should just move past it and focus on things that are real. I think this is to misunderstand the nature of the myth and to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I think what this myth is I think the ancient Greeks came across a universal human truth. They observed their community around them and noticed that whenever narcissism veered off into an extreme and people engaged in self-love and forgot about others around them, it always ended up in a poor social outcome. And so they noticed this truth about what happens when you don't love other people and you become self-obsessed. And they found a way to package that truth in an easily understandable narrative that could then be transported throughout time to other people in the form of a story. That's what a story kind of is. It's a way of transmitting a tale to somebody else that is understandable to them. And that is kind of the myth. The myth is like the packaging that is used to transport the message, which is a truth wrapped in this packaging. And then when it hits the other person, you can take the packaging away, strip it away, and get to the truth underneath it, which is the myth. The myth is gone, and the truth is about the trait of narcissism and how badly it affects other people. Just because it didn't happen or it's not scientific doesn't mean that it doesn't indicate a truth that can be observed in the human experience. And I'm somebody who, I know the story of Narcissus roughly, the essence of the story, and I've never memorized it. I knew it since childhood. I came across it maybe once or twice, and that was enough to keep it with me for life. Yes, I don't know the exact story from memory, but the essence of the story, what it's about, and how narcissism is bad, is something that stays with me. And so it works as a way to transport things to others, as a kind of signpost of how to live a life successfully. And you have to remember that most people weren't literate in the past. So what better way to transport a story than to wrap it up in a narrative that's easily rememberable because it's shocking and brutal, and that stays in the memory without repeated memorization. It's genius, really. In what other way could it have been passed on? Our ancestors, or the ancient Greeks in this scenario more specifically, couldn't have just said, okay, we figured out that narcissism is bad, pass it on. We've all played the game Chinese whispers, and we know what happens when somebody says a sentence to somebody else and then somebody else has to go and spread it to somebody else. They remember it poorly, and eventually at the end it comes out extremely garbled. What the myth does is it transports the essence of the story through the shocking nature of the myth and the shocking details of the myth in such a way that it preserves it from being twisted and distorted too much to go beyond its actual meaning. And so if we look at the myth of Narcissus with a sense of charity and actually try to understand what the ancient Greeks were trying to do, we come to the conclusion that they thought that narcissism wasn't a good trait because they could observe it in their society, and they tried to pass it down to us so that we might miss that potential pothole in our own lives. And then what's naturally true as a consequence of that is that the opposite of self-love, of loving other people, of living our lives to try and focus on other people and take an interest in their lives and to serve them and to live for others is a way to a fulfilling life in contrast. And so because love is not narcissism, it requires that we have some level of self-awareness about ourselves and others in order to love fully. And it also entails that we need some level of self-control, because you have to control your emotions and your desires to rise above yourself so that you don't end up worshipping yourself. In order to take a full interest in somebody else, even just to pay attention to somebody across from you at the dinner table and to really listen to what they're saying and to look at their face and actually pay attention to them, requires that you forego yourself and forget about yourself for the moment. You have to stop wandering off in your mind and thinking about other things when somebody else is talking, or you have to stop focusing on the food that is in front of you and how tasty it tastes as you shovel it into your mouth. You have to rise above those desires and really pay attention to the person opposite you. And so that is what love entails. It means that we have to limit ourselves and rise above our baser instincts in order to pay attention to somebody else and care about them. And so on some level, love includes the idea that you have to humble yourself in order to take a true interest in another person. And then once you do that, you'll be able to see that person as a value of the highest degree. And what that means as well is that love isn't just simply an emotion that we feel and then it's a fleeting emotion that passes throughout time. It's also an act of the will, because you actively have to moderate yourself through your reason and through your will and control your desires in order to be able to create the scenario in which you can love another person by paying attention to them. So love isn't just something that is a feeling. It's based as well in the will. And that's something that's important to say in 2023, because we've completely forgot this and we have no idea what love really is, I don't think. And one of the ways that I can think to love, that is just a big way that comes to mind, is previous generations, and to look back on their actions with a sense of charity or even forgiveness. When we think about World War I, for example, or even World War II, our ancestors faced terrible mortal danger and they would throw themselves into bullet fire. They would get out of the trenches and run into bullet fire. Instead of choosing to cower behind the trench or run away from the battlefield, they would do it knowing that they would face certain death. And they did it because they loved something higher than themselves. In that moment, your self-preservation is telling you, get away from this scenario because we're going to die. And those men rose above that innate pull to move away from the battlefield so that they could run into danger for the sake of their country and their families, particularly. Many of them would have been thinking about their families, and their families being the people they loved, and that they needed to do this to protect the country they lived in so that their families might have a future. What is that if not love? To recognize that sacrifice that they made is an act of charity on our part. It's an act of gratitude. And it acknowledges the connection between them and us, and the sacrifice that they laid down and how it affects us. And the bond that we have with the World War generations now is that it is our duty to safeguard the civilization that they protected so that future generations can also enjoy our civilization. The World War generation laid down an example of self-sacrificing love for us. And so we must reciprocate that so that their actions weren't in vain. And so that our country, our families, and our future progeny can also share in a country that isn't a shambles. What would be contrary to this spirit and this goal would be to just go around in a narcissistic state and to busy ourselves in the endless consumption of material goods for our own benefit, and not to think about the wider implications of the actions that we're doing for others and how it relates to the people we owe something to in the past. We have to think about how our actions affect and hopefully benefit wider society. And we're humans, and we'll make mistakes and fall off the wagon, because that's, who we are. We don't always live up to the highest ideals that we aim towards and expect, the highest standards that we expect of ourselves. But this is just part of the journey. The falling down, but then picking oneself up after one has fallen, is part of the journey of what it is to move towards loving other people. And that's part of what makes it worthwhile. It's more noble to have fallen but still picked oneself up and to succeed despite that fall than it would have been if you hadn't fallen. So now I have to talk about how we actually view relationships and love in modernity, in Britain at least, but probably modernity at large. And that's something quite different. We view love as something that is primarily emotion. We think of it as a feeling, as something that we feel inside, and that's something that should be everlasting. And we judge our relationships with others primarily based on this feeling that we think is real. And so individuals go into relationships always wanting to feel this same level of attraction to the person that they're with. And it's how they judge, it's the standard by which they judge that relationship. So when this feeling inevitably evaporates, because we're human beings and we don't hold on to any feeling permanently, we're beings that are constantly changing, and we can't ever satiate our desires completely. Whenever we've eaten food, 6 hours later, so we feel hungry again. It's the same with this feeling of attraction to others. It's not something that is permanent. It's something that comes to us, and it can come and go with another person. But nevertheless, in modernity now, we're judging our relationships by this feeling. And so when it evaporates, we believe that this must mean that the relationship must end. And in order to be happy, we need to go and find somebody with whom we can feel this permanent and eternal happiness, in this kind of like fairy tale idea of what it is to be loved and to love somebody else. But like our tale of Narcissus, who came before us, this is a self-centered love. It's a love that is primarily focused on our feelings and our emotions and how we want to be in the world. It isn't focused on the other. And so the problem with this, as I've already stated, is that nothing we feel or nothing we desire can ever be really satiated, and it never lasts. Our feelings and desires are always fleeting and changing. You can tell this by whenever you buy something and you're really excited about the product that you've bought, and you just can't wait to get home and unwrap the package. And then you play with whatever it is that you've bought for a few hours or even a day or a couple of days. And then eventually the novelty wears off, and it just becomes another thing that you own that you don't derive any joy from anymore. And part of the reason for this is because we live in a material world that experiences time. So it experiences change as things shift. As the present moves into the past, the world outside changes, and we can't remain completely stable within it. We change as well. And so there is nothing really within our experience that is immutable. And it's inevitable that we will end up going through these dry spells where we don't feel the same level of attraction that we initially did for our partner. It may come back, it may not. Sometimes there's ups and downs in a relationship, but it's completely normal to go through these periods where you don't feel the same level of physical attraction or as you did initially for your partner. And so no one walks through life permanently happy or permanently besotted with somebody else. It's just not really realistic. It's a complete fabrication of what's real. It's a little bit like social media, where people post pictures of themselves grinning and happy, and every single photo they seem to post is them just living an amazing life, but it's not the reality behind the curtain. When the photos have gone away, there are people just like you and I who have problems and whose lives are marked by sadness and suffering and toil. And the same is true of partners that we can have. At some point, their errors and faults are going to make themselves known to you, and you're going to be faced with the fact that you don't live with somebody perfect, because none of us are. And if you think that the solution to this is just to run away and find somebody different and that's going to make you happier, it's a little bit like burying your head in the sand and not confronting the reality of the human experience, which is that this material world does not give us happiness completely. Even if we run away and find somebody else who we feel this strong attraction to again, and we go through another relationship where we feel this way, it's inevitable that will also end, that strong feeling. And then what do you do then? Do you just run away again and find somebody else who you can feel this fleeting attraction to for a while? Do you just keep going through this cycle where you are attracted to somebody else in an emotion, and then you cut the relationship off when that ends and seek somebody else? What will that result in the end? You'll just end up eventually alone at the most vulnerable time in your life, in your elderly years. We'll have failed to build a strong and secure relationship with one person that can help us to navigate the rough seas of life. And even if you don't feel attracted to your existing partner, say, if you built a relationship over 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, the bond that you will have through the shared experiences with each other will transcend what it is anyway to feel sexual attraction for someone, because you will know that person so well and they will know you so well, and you have gone through so much together and supported each other through those experiences that you'll have built a bond that can't be shattered by something fleeting and shallow like sexual attraction. And so to stay with someone and to cultivate a relationship and to work at it and to rise above yourself and really try to build a relationship that is based on a rock is a noble goal, and it's something that will bear fruit for you in your life, and especially in your later life as you go through the aging process and your body becomes more infirm and you're not capable of doing the same things as you were, and you might have ill health. Having someone with you at that moment in time who knows you completely and who will sacrifice themselves to look after you, and vice versa, is something that you can't really discount in this world. It's something special. And so if your ears are burning right now and you're listening to this and this is you're somebody who's gone through multiple relationships and you've burned the bridges every single time and you've moved on to somebody new, I don't want you to sit here to listen to this and feel despair and to feel like there is no hope and that I'm just castigating you for the choices you've made. I don't want it to come across like that. There is still hope. You can always dedicate yourself to love of others, and it doesn't even have to be in a relationship. There is honestly the highest form of love that we have ever known to man is the love of God. And you could turn to God and spend the rest of your days acting as through God's commandments and loving other people and God, and spending your time in worship of him. And that would be worth even more than a relationship, because it would be a relationship with the only eternal thing we've ever been able to conceive of, an entity that transcends desire and boundaries and time and is eternal and isn't. It's the hope that we have in a world where we can't satiate our desires, is a world in which there is an eternal God. And so why not dedicate your life to that? It's an extremely noble goal, and many people have done it before you, like monks and nuns. And their testimony is out there to read about how this life can be extremely fulfilling. And so as we bring this to a close, this episode, I wanted to just recap and say that the story of Narcissus is there to tell us what it is not to love, what it is to engage in self-love, and to fail to fully appreciate other people and how this can have negative consequences for our lifetime. Our lives are short, and the people who are around you are only going to be around for a short amount of time. You never know when somebody's going to be taken from you. And that's the same with you. You never know when you're going to go. It's an illusion to think that you're going to live forever. You won't. And so it's good to make the most of our time by actually caring about other people and paying attention to them. And that's the main takeaway from this episode. The fruits of rising above Narcissus, the Narcissus in ourselves, and actually paying attention to others and building relationships, and particularly in romantic relationships, the effort to build a romantic relationships and really spend your time in the service of your partner and getting to know them better than anybody else can be unbelievably rewarding. And it can give you the rock upon which to build a life and a family and gain some kind of fulfillment in this life, which is extremely dangerous and full of surprises. But in order to do that, you have to meet somebody who also thinks in the same way. And you have to take your time to get to know that person before you go into romantic relations. I don't like the way that Britain is going culturally, and we're encouraging narcissism, even things like technology. A lot of the technological advances we have made, things like smartphones and laptops, they just encourage you to be locked in your own mind all the time and to engage in entertainment for your own sakes. They're not encouraging you to really get off it all and pay attention to the real physical person who you live alongside, or the people you live alongside in a family. And I think it's necessary that we moderate the things that we're doing now and return to a culture where we're encouraged to forget the self a little bit and forget our own desires and the desires of greed and lust and all of these kinds of things, and to look into the eyes and heart of another person and to really appreciate them as who they are, as created individuals who are given to you at this moment in time to enjoy the company of. I think that's the way forward for our communities and nation.